Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look at an Isle Royale myth dispelled by a mother and son. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To talk about this Isle Royale myth, I'm joined again by reporter Jimmy Lovrien. Jimmy, welcome back now on episode 34 of Northlandia.
Hello, Wyatt, and happy episode 34 to you.
Yeah, and for listeners who maybe this story might seem a tad familiar, this is actually a throwback episode to a previous entry in the Northlandia column prior to the launch of the podcast. I believe, Jimmy, this was the last article you wrote pre-podcast. So it'll be 2 Ages Northlandia, pre-podcast and post-podcast. This is the last pre-podcast article that you put together.
Exactly, and I think I halfway expected it to be the first podcast, but it wasn't. So thankfully, we have a recording, and we are bringing it back out of the vault, so to speak, for a podcast episode.
Mm-hmm. So, Jimmy, let's start off before we get into the story itself. Let's talk about, for the benefit of non-Northland listeners who aren't from our area, who don't know what Isle Royale is. Even sure. I have a limited knowledge of it. Most of my knowledge of Isle Royale comes from recording D&T minute stories that have to do with wolf studies.
Right.
That's the extent of my knowledge is mainly from wolf studies relating to Isle Royale. But for those who don't know, what is Isle Royale exactly and where is it?
Well, everyone should know Isle Royale is awesome. So it's an island in Lake Superior. I think everyone local knows where Lake Superior is. I'm guessing even people outside of our area listening know where Lake Superior is. But Isle Royale is a narrow but long island just off the very tip of Minnesota. You know where the Arrowhead tip is, where Grand Portage is at. You go about 15 miles out by boat into the lake, and you're going to hit Isle Royale, which is technically in Michigan. Now, it's like 40, 50 miles long and only a few miles wide. It's really close to the Canadian border. And again, it feels like looking at a map, you'd probably think it was in Canada. You definitely wouldn't think it was in Michigan, but it is. And it's a national park. So Isle Royale National Park covers all of the islands there, and then kind of the waterways in between and stuff. And so it's a popular place for backpacking. It's popular for boaters, both motorized or sailboats, kayaking. You can go canoe within the island and portage lakes within the island, and it's also famously where there's this long-running wolf and moose study. So there are wolves and there are moose out there. There are no deer. There are no bear. There are no raccoons. Makes camping, kind of some of the things that make camping a little annoying. Having to hang food and all that kind of stuff. Well, you don't have to do that out there. There's no bears. There are also no deer ticks because there are no deer. So anyway, it's awesome. And you'll probably see moose when you're out there. You might see it's very rare that you'd see a wolf, but you'll certainly see scat and footprints of wolves out there. So yeah, it is it's the least visited national park in the lower 48, and that's mainly because it's hard to get to. You got to either take a boat or a seaplane. So yeah, I could keep talking about Isle Royale if you wanted. Me too. I've been out there twice for work and twice for pleasure, but we'll leave it at that.
So it seems very obvious now what interested you about Isle Royale. That seems pretty self-explanatory now that why you'd be interested in anything involving Isle Royale. But maybe instead, what prompted you to want to pursue this story? How did you? I'm sure. I have my subjects from any opportunity to cover that topic, I'll do. Anything involving sled dogs, I find a way to make it work. So it seems pretty clear that Isle Royale is something that if you can write about, you'll write about it.
Oh,
but
for sure.
What prompted you to write about this topic? How did you find this one?
Yeah. So I couldn't convince them to let me go out there for this story, as I have for 2 others. But nonetheless, so there's this picture, and maybe readers have seen this on social media. It's a picture of a rock sticking out from water, and the caption says, "Isle Royale, the largest island on Lake Superior, has a lake, which has an island, which has a pond, which has a boulder. So the boulder becomes the largest island in the largest lake on the largest island in the largest lake in the world." And people kind of accepted that as, oh yeah, wow, okay, sure, yeah, share, whatever. And anyway, I spoke with Roger Dickey, and his mom, Ellie Talbert, and they actually went out to try to find this and dispelled the rumor that, yeah, it's not real. It is not some boulder, within a island, within a lake, whatever, all the phases. It's just, that's not real. They kind of figured it out beforehand, but they wanted to go out and take photos anyway. So I saw his story on Atlas Obscura. It's a great website of, I think Northlandia in some ways is our version of Atlas Obscura, covering the weird things and interesting things of the Northland. But there is a story about that, that post being the talking about that boulder being within an island, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of made it sound like, oh, it's fact, here's this thing, it's unique, it's real, whatever. And anyway, Roger Dickey, I think, saw that, read it, did his own research, went out to prove it, and then they have since updated the article with him and his mom's story about how it is in fact not real. So I got a hold of them a year or two after that article came out, and I thought this would be great for our readers to understand too, because people are still sharing that dang meme that isn't real. So I spoke with Roger and Ellie about their son-mother adventure into the wilderness. And so this is Roger Dickey kind of describing his research into this so-called Moose Boulder ahead of the trip.
But as I started to research the trip, I was unable to find Moose Boulder, and I grew more and more suspicious, wondering whether or not it really existed. And there various people had gone deep into the interior of Isle Royale, and they cataloged their trips and different blogs, and they had GPS coordinates, and they had tried to find Moose Boulder, but nobody was able to. And of course, I looked at satellite imagery. I downloaded GPS maps. I did a ton of research, but ended up unable to find it, and eventually learned that it was a hoax.
So where did this myth come from exactly? When did this all start?
Yeah, so Roger kind of figured out the origins a bit of this post. So it definitely proliferated across the internet in ways that, falsehoods do. Not only was that Atlas Obscura piece mentioning in it, but the Wikipedia page for Isle Royale's Siskiwit Lake presented the myth as a fact, and then high-profile social media accounts like the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Facebook page shared it. I think Roger said that he had found out about it because the famous Lake Superior Twitter account, the account personifying the lake, had been tweeting about it and tweeting back and forth with some other lake Twitter account. So anyway, he started kind of going down this rabbit hole. He contacted the Wikipedia editors who had mentioned Moose Boulder, and one of them said, oh yeah, my source was Superior Wilderness, Isle Royale National Park, by this author, and so Dickey ordered the book, and it made no mention of the boulder, of this Moose Boulder that the post is going on about. And so then he managed to track down that picture I described earlier of like the rock out, kind of popping out of the water. And while that was from Isle Royale, it was not from, it was out in Lake Superior, it was, off the mainland of Isle Royale, kind of surrounding the island. There's a lot of rocks and other islands out in Lake Superior surrounding Isle Royale, and that's what that came from. It was like some researchers a long time ago had taken the photo, and it was the Woods Hole Oceanic Institution on a research trip to the park had taken the photo, and it was actually from Lake Superior's on the island's south shore. So the Moose Boulder was supposed to be on Ryan Island, which does exist, which is within Lake Siskiwit, which is real, which is within Isle Royale, which is within Lake Superior. So you've got all the layers that exist down to the island. And now what Roger set out to figure out is, did that Ryan Island include its own body of water that something like a rock or a boulder was protruding from that could maybe be considered an island or a rock or an island? And so that's what he set out to find. He had pretty much, by that point, confirmed, there was nothing supporting that Moose Boulder existed, but, photographs can provide proof. And so I'll let him kind of describe his thinking of taking photos for evidence here.
I guess planning a big trek was something I had wanted to do, and I kind of was invested in that idea before I realized it wasn't real. So after that, we had to do the trip anyway, and I figured we'd take some pictures. We took a ton of photos of it, just so that, if we wanted later to, tell people about the trip and, prove that it wasn't real, that we could. And it'd be, it's hard to do a bunch of online research and say that a real place isn't real. So I thought, okay, well, the online research gets us 90% of the way there, but we have to actually go and see it with our own eyes and prove it and take the photos so that we have the receipts. We can come back if somebody, if we ever want to prove that it's not real, we can. But I debated whether we should even do that or not, because I think, the legend of Moose Boulder was so much fun. It's more fun for people to think that's real than not.
I guess the timing for that works out well, that they were already planning a trip out there. Now there's like a purpose to it. I wonder if it's kind of like, how you look for opportunities to report on Isle Royale. There's looking for an extra excuse to justify the venture to go out there. It's also got a productive spin to it, to the going on Mythbusters adventure.
Yeah, exactly. I think even though at that point it was probably pretty well confirmed it was a myth and myth busted, Roger reached out to his mom, who enthusiastically agreed to join him, and they were going to go out there anyway, and they were going to go look anyway, just to see it for their own eyes, or not see it with their own eyes. So yeah, they arrived in Houghton, Michigan, where they got on a seaplane that took them over to Isle Royale on the very northeast side of it, Rock Harbor area, where they rented a canoe and then took a water taxi closer to Lake Siskiwit and did some canoeing and portaging to get to the lake and eventually the island, where they wandered around, tried to find something that resembled a body of water within this Ryan Island, and no such luck. He said that there was one spot, in a really rainy year or in a flash flood, could it fill with water? And could something be sticking out of it that you could call Moose Boulder? I guess, but there was it's not like it's out there always existing. It would have to be, he saw no evidence of it existing, but I suppose if the conditions were wet enough, perhaps there would be a low area that could fill with water, and maybe there would be a rock sticking out of that water. So that's kind of what he concluded. But then their adventure was really just beginning. They didn't see it with their own eyes. They knew it was false, and then they had to get back. And that's where they ran into a little bit of trouble. And so this is Ellie describing the predicament they found themselves in on their return trip.
I mean, we got lost, is basically the long story short of it, is that we came off of one of these giant boulders and went and we did a lot of bushwhacking. It was amazing, but yes, we actually walked 19 miles and
How many miles?
And did not get back to 19 miles and didn't get back to the hotel.
So Ellie had joked that her one condition for joining her son out on Isle Royale for this was that she didn't want to camp. But so they were heading back to the Rock Harbor area, which has some cabins and like a little resort. But anyway, she didn't want to camp, and well, they had to for the night. This is Roger describing his experience trying to find a way out.
It was quite late when we got there, and so we had dinner, I guess, at 11 p.m. Cooked some dinner on the stove, and then we left the canoe at Mosky Bay, and the idea was to then go hike back to Rock Harbor, then get another water taxi, pick up the canoe, and then bring it back the next day. So we started hiking just, on foot without the canoe. As Mom said, we got lost in a rock field, a very long, I think it was a quarter mile of just rock surface. So when we got to the other end of it, we couldn't find the trail. And I left Mom on the rock and marked the location on the GPS. And then I spent about 2 hours bushwhacking in all different directions from the rock field. And around 3 a.m, we finally found the trail. And we ended up tapping out shortly after that and just staying the night in a tent.
Now, eventually, they did find a park ranger, and they woke him up. He let them borrow a tent for the night, and the next day, he got them a water taxi to carry them and their canoe back to Rock Harbor. So, a little, quite a bit of added adventure for the two, but they laughed about it and said that, it just made it an adventure, and they had a lot of fun with it. Although Roger did say he was terrified.
Oh, if it was me, that would have been a tragedy. It would have turned into a Blair Witch entry,
right?
Lost footage, never heard from again kind of situation.
Exactly.
I'm not exactly the most nature-esque camping experienced gentleman.
A big moose in the night going through the forest, or the howls of a wolf. I mean, you don't have to worry about bear or something, but yeah, I mean, I'd like to be in my tent after dark. That might be nice. I'd like to be where I need to be that night rather than panicking and trying to find some place to go. I'd like to be settled when it's still light out.
Mm-hmm. So after all of that, is the myth still circulating?
It is, yes. You still see that post from time to time. And actually, Roger had debated whether or not he wanted to share the photos because the myth is fun, he said. But, it ultimately, Atlas Obscura kind of shared their story of their trip and some of those photos. We have those as well on our website. But, kind of something he said was the legend of Moose Boulder was so much fun. It's more fun for people to think that's real than not.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, there's something that it's kind of enjoyable about the myth, the legend, even if it's not necessarily true.
Right. Yeah, it's like a Russian doll of lakes and islands, and yeah, I get the appeal of it. It's cool to think about. Mm-hmm.
And how many people are going to be going out there, to explore and see it themselves? As you said, it's one of the least attended national parks. It's hard to get to, and it's still a pretty big area. Like if you're just wandering around it, Have you been when in your times you've been to Isle Royale? Have you even been near the area where this theoretically would be at?
Not really. I was at Rock Harbor, which was still, I think he just said, was like a 10-mile, journey from Siskiwit Lake. I guess I would have been kind of on the other side of a ridge this last summer from Siskiwit Lake. But again, I mean that's quite a bit of hiking, even though it's the short way across the island. I mean, that's not easy to get to. So no, and then to get not only to the lake, it's one thing to get to an inland lake. There are campsites along the lakes and stuff that you can hike to, but then, you got to get a canoe with you, do some portaging, and then haul it's so many more steps than just, first getting to the island, logistical challenge. Backpacking is one thing. Canoeing and portaging, that's a lot more. So yeah, I have not been to Siskiwit Lake or ventured to Ryan Island. Maybe if I would like to do some canoeing, it's kind of like the Boundary Waters in that you can portage to lake and stuff. It's not that size of the Boundary Waters, not that many lakes and portages, but it would be a cool, different way to see the island, to see Isle Royale and the islands within Isle Royale. But so maybe I'll get out to Ryan Island sometime. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. When you eventually find your other story on Isle Royale to try to get out there again.
Yeah, maybe it'll show up and I can convince them here to let me go out and visit this Moose Boulder, which is now, which we know is fake, but who knows? Maybe the right amount of water. Maybe a beaver will be on Ryan Island and form a pond, build a dam, form a pond that wasn't there in 2019 when Roger and Ellie were out there, but maybe that exists and a rock will just stick out just enough that we can call that Moose Boulder or something. Mm-hmm. Stranger things have happened.
Oh yeah, stranger things definitely have happened. And I feel like if nothing else, I feel like this is a nice reminder to not take everything on Wikipedia as fact.
Yes.
That's why it's not as I was beating our heads in school, not a trusted news source. My high school history teacher would actually go into Wikipedia and change things in the articles on the subjects that we were writing on for papers.
That's what you've heard the story of General Jimmy Lovrien, right?
I have, but our listeners haven't, if you want to share that.
That might be a topic for another podcast. I would encourage our readers to search General Jimmy Lovrien or Jimmy Lovrien Cinco de Mayo. I'll give it to you in short, kind of like what you were describing, your teachers going in and changing things. We were doing a web quest I believe I was in 10th grade Spanish, and there was this web quest where it was kind of had to look up things for a worksheet, use your internet skills to find the answers. And I knew everyone was just going to go to Wikipedia. It was May 4th, so day before Cinco de Mayo, and it was Cinco de Mayo themed. Anyway, I go to Wikipedia first. My friends and I had already been vandalizing Wikipedia as a hobby, saying the Beatles invented the light bulb, or our high school had a page on Wikipedia, which we changed all of the time. Anyway,
it's always monitored and changed, but like
Yes.
how much damage, there can be a lot of damage done before it's actually caught.
And things are usually changed really quick. Well, anyway, back to the Cinco de Mayo page. The first line says, Cinco de Mayo celebrates the victory of the Mexican army over the French forces at the Battle of Pueblo. And then, by General Ignacio, and I forgot his last name. Anyway, so he's the general in the Mexican army, and I deleted his name and put Jimmy Lovrien in there instead. I mean, really quick at it. And then was just like my partner and I were like giggling about it. And we're like, all right, let's see when people are gonna, looking around the room when people are gonna finally get to Wikipedia. And they did, and they laughed, and it was funny. And then at lunch, I was telling my friends about it, and I was like, oh yeah, I did this. And then someone looked it up on their phone or something, and they're like, oh no, it's still there. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, no, it is still there. And so it's like, okay, it's been 2 or 3 hours now. Usually these changes of these vandalism things are changed immediately. So anyway, for a while, and a lot of these pages have now been deleted, but all these blogs like copied and pasted from Wikipedia and for their Cinco de Mayo blog post,
that's where things really get
Yeah.
even if it's caught later, like
Right.
people have like possibly copied and pasted it ahead of time,
Exactly. So these blogs, the former Washington football coach has like a faith in football blog, and he used it to introduce his top 5 Cinco Mexican list or something like that. A website was, a restaurant was promoting some Cinco de Mayo special, or it was either like a restaurant or like a boat. Maybe it was a boat restaurant. I don't know. But they did it, and then they cited National Geographic. Like, I don't even know if Wikipedia had that as a source, but they just threw in a source on their Facebook post, even though that wasn't real. And anyway, my friends and I would go and comment on that every year, like I said something like, oh yeah, I wasn't, I comment on this Facebook post like, my proudest accomplishment wasn't beating the French forces at the Battle of Pueblo. It was always being there for my kids.
Oh my God.
So anyway, yeah.
Another lie.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I wrote about it in a column not long after I started working here, and it kind of blew up again. And I've kind of tried to not, I mean, I don't shy away from it. It's how I'm remembered in my hometown, and people know me as the general around here and a lot of places. But so that's the story of General Jimmy Lovrien and Wikipedia. Don't trust it.
And now our listeners know as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just tying that all together back to the original story, I feel like a good message behind all of this is check your sources.
Yep.
Double check things. Don't just take things at face value. And it sounds like this mother-son duo did exactly that.
Exactly.
Double check the sources, looked into it, and then went and got their own evidence or lack of evidence themselves. So.
For sure. Yeah. Don't take it at face value like he did. He was able to kind of spend significant amount of time probably, but go down a rabbit hole confirming things that didn't exist in real life, and then went and saw it for himself. So yeah, don't get duped by a 16-year-old in Spanish class. So that might happen.
All right, Jimmy. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It's always an honor to have a general here with us on the podcast. So
At ease, Wyatt.
Until next time.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this previous column and see photos, follow the link in the episode description. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnewstribune.news. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with the rush to return, here in Northlandia.